All right, time to hit record. Hey, welcome to the channel or the show, depending on how you're listening. I'm James, and I talk about writing stuff in the creative life. Today, I wanted to talk about the best way to find community in 2025 as a writer. And part of this is me thinking through what I'm going to say in a panel that's coming up for me on November 15th with the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, and I'll put a link to that conference. It's an online conference called Quasar, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But I'm going to be on a panel talking about resilience for authors. And I think resilience as a writer, as a small business person, as a creative, there's a lot of ways to approach that. But it all kind of starts with you need other people. And I think there's always been this sort of trope or stereotype that the writer is working by themselves in a cave. They come out of the cave and they have produced a thing, right? And they get a publisher to pick them and publish the thing. And then it appears out in the world and everything is great, right? And then you hit the New York Times bestseller list or whatever. Well, the longer I do this, the more I realize that it's like anything in life. When you run a business, when you are part of a nonprofit, when you volunteer, it's all about connecting with other people, right? It's all about how you approach other people, connect with them. They share information with you, you share information with them. And as you prove yourself trustworthy and known, and, in this business, you can meet deadlines and produce something that people like, you get more work and you get to be part of more things. So it's really not different that way. And those stereotypes really work against really what is the business of writing. And I think if you've talked to anybody that has been part of Hollywood, like a screenwriter or something in that neighborhood, like they do everything collaboratively. You might write a script, but then you're going to spend time working on that script with other people. And they have just a very different creative process than an author might have, where you're doing most of the work yourself. You will then pass off that manuscript to an editor. But that's another thing that some people are surprised by. Like the editor gets to make changes to my work, or the publisher wants me to change different things, or even the publisher wants me to write something in a specific way that is what the audience is going to want. Because that's the other thing that I'm not going to get into in this video, but a lot of people start with the idea that they're writing in a cave, writing something to please themselves, and they're not even thinking about the people that are going to read the thing. And then they're kind of surprised when it's hard to publish that thing, or it's easier than ever to publish it. It's harder than ever to get people to buy it and read it and read more of what it is you're making. So say you've gotten past the first hurdle and you are writing, like you are working consistently toward being a writer, doing the consistent work, making things that could be called short stories or novels, or be it poetry or creative nonfiction, like a thing that could be published, right? And you're doing that in a way that is professional, like you would approach anything if you were starting a small business. You're working every day, you're putting in like serious effort into making it as good as it can be. You can't do that in a vacuum, but it's also hard to find people that could potentially give you feedback or encourage you as you're working, or just look at the thing and maybe help you know that am I on the right track? Am I not on the right track? That's all important information. But increasingly, it's harder to find those people. There was sort of a golden period with social media starting in probably about 2015, I guess, or even when I was a kid, like way back in the day. Like Del Rey Books had a website with forums, and you could go on there and submit your work. And because it kind of drew people that were all attracted to Del Rey publishing, like they all had a pretty good idea of what Del Rey liked. They all liked similar things. So you could upload work and get feedback. And I still feel like that was sort of a golden age because people hadn't figured out how to game it yet. And that's one of the real problems with social media, is just it becomes marketing. I can talk about that in a bit. But around 2015, when Facebook took off and groups were, more of a thing, it was much easier to find writers groups or people sharing information about writing. And then it was very easy to like splinter off and start another group if you found people that were more on your wavelength. Increasingly, it is difficult to do that. Like Facebook is just not a place where I like to be very much. It's not positive for me. And I think for a lot of people, it's the same way. Depending on where you are at in trying to gather information, it can be difficult. Like if you're brand new and you come into a group and you start asking questions, sometimes people that are already in the group can jump on you because, that's been asked 1,000 times. Go read the FAQ or if they have a wiki or whatever. And that can be discouraging. And the last thing you want is to go into a space and ask for help and just get, smacked down. But that is one of the places where it's kind of like wide open. Like you have to have a Facebook account, right? And people probably want to know who you are. So you need to at least maybe have a photo and have shared a little bit about things that you like or dislike or about yourself so that you don't just look like a bot. But that's still one place where you can start is Facebook, like just looking for people. But I wanted to list a few things that I would recommend as places to start. And I think I would really recommend starting locally, if at all possible. And that, I think the best way to do that, as I think about it, is probably with a class, if at all possible. So a local, like say short story class, or if we just say, local writing class that is aimed toward what you want. The reason for that is it's good for you to do that. You can just kind of build your craft in certain ways, but it's a good way to connect with people that are part of the local writing scene. So I'm part of a local writers group called the Wordos here in Eugene, Oregon. And we have a number of people in the group that do teach, and it kind of becomes an outreach for us because they talk about the group. And if people go through the class, they enjoy it. They quite often, will come attend meetings and end up joining our group. And it's a way for them to progress in their craft. There might also be local writing conventions. And this one can be difficult depending on where you live. Here in the Pacific Northwest, there just are not that many conventions. Like we have the Willamette Writers in Portland, and they have a lot of programming, but a lot of it is centered around Portland. And so while they have some online things, if you are outside the greater Portland area, it's pretty difficult to take part in that. I am not as knowledgeable on other groups like the Willamette Writers that might be in Seattle or, other parts of the Pacific Northwest. I would, probably just jump on Google and look at, local conventions that are near to you. And the good thing about a convention is that it shouldn't be that expensive. I wouldn't spend more than $100 on registration if it's a multi-day convention. There should be classes. Like, is it aimed at writers or is it aimed at fans? If it's aimed at writers, there should be classes and panels and things that should be interesting to you. But it's really a place where you can just go talk to people. And I would be totally upfront about the fact that, hey, I'm a new writer. I'm looking for community. I'm looking for other people I can potentially connect with. And that can be a good place to do it. Like, take a notebook and write down what people tell you. Like, if there are no local things, then are there online resources that people recommend? But the one thing I want to keep in mind as you do this is focus on your genre. So if you're writing romance and the only groups around you are science fiction or literary fiction or poetry, it's not going to be as helpful to you to go there and share your work because they're not going to be able to give you good feedback. And while I think it's important to be part of a local group and know local people, it can also be pretty frustrating if they're giving you feedback that isn't useful. And that really just kind of gets in the way of what you're trying to do. So I would definitely balance that. Find a convention that is within the work that you're doing. The Horror Writers of America, they list conventions on their site. Science Fiction Writers, CEFWA.org, they list it. Like, there are a lot of, like, in the genre stuff that I do, there's a lot of conventions around that should tailor to what you want. And if you're willing to fly, like the East Coast, to Midwest has so many conventions. Like, it's much easier to drive within 5 hours to find something that will work for you. But finding that thing that's within your genre, going ready to be open, ask questions, tell people that that's what you're looking for. Like, you really need to be like practice saying, if you got to get in front of a mirror or even be with friends and say, hey, I'm James. I have written a space opera novel and I'm looking for resources on. Now be careful here, because if you say I'm looking for an editor, they might try to sell you to an editor, or somebody will try and sell you a service. And just say, hey, I'm looking for writers groups, things like that. I'm not looking for a publisher, because there are quite often publishers out there that would love to sell you services to, get your book to market, when there are lots of things that you can just do yourself. But go in looking to meet people. So I think it's good to meet local people, depending on where your comfort level is there. But if you are focused on online resources, then, starting, like I said, with Facebook, the next step really, I would actually just even use Facebook to try and find out how to get to Discord. And let's actually do like a little arrow here, because we don't want to spend time on Facebook. But the problem with Discord is that so many useful Discord groups you can't Google them, right? You can't find them unless you find the link somewhere. So how do you find Discord groups? I can speak to science fiction because that's, what I'm a part of, but quite often magazines will have their own Discord. Apex Magazine has one. Clarkesworld has one. A number of writers have them. Elizabeth Bear has a Discord that is, pretty vibrant. Aeon 14 had a Discord, or pretty sure still has a Discord. I haven't been as active in that one. But quite often the magazines where people are publishing, while they're aimed at fans, they will also have channels that are aimed at writers. And while it's not a place where the editor is necessarily going to like, oh, I like you, I'll publish your stuff, like Neil Clark of Clarkesworld quite often gives like really great information about the magazine publishing world, like the reality of what it's like to publish right now. And that's all just really interesting stuff to soak in, right? And that's a place where you can connect with people that are trying to do the same thing you are. And I'll talk about critique in a second. Right now, we're just talking about finding places. But right now in 2025, I think Discord is where you're going to find the most helpful communities that are doing this kind of stuff. Outside of that, like, I am not as good at like TikTok or Instagram, potentially YouTube, like if there are connections there. Like, you might look at like that other pipeline to Discord could be YouTube channels. A lot of these do want you to be a subscriber in some way. So the magazines are usually open to subscribers. Lit RPG like has a lot of Facebook and Discord groups. So if you're writing in that genre, that can be a thing to look for. But that's where you're going to find the energy around the people that are doing the thing that you would like to do. And if you have other, like if anybody knows of other ways to get to better communities, I would love to hear about it, because right now it really seems like Discord is where the action is, but it's also frustrating because there's just a real walled garden there and it's hard to find them. So okay, so you do find this group of people that are doing the same thing you're doing. Like, do you want them, like, this is kind of two different things, like a support group or networking group versus a critique group. And these are different things. So sometimes this is also called a mastermind. A mastermind group. Now be wary of mastermind groups, because that often means paying for it. And so some author, some marketer will have a group that wants you to pay to be part of it, unless it is like really important for, like, I don't know. That's the problem. Like, a lot of these marketing things, like, people know how to sell the book that they sold. They don't know necessarily how to sell your book. One group that I do feel pretty good about recommending that has an open Facebook group you can be part of is Mallory Cooper, my co-writer in Aeon 14, has the Writing Wives on Facebook. And she and her wife, Jill Cooper, are probably the best marketers that I know. And while they do offer, paid services, they also offer a lot of coaching services. Mallory has her YouTube channel where she shares a lot of great information. And like, you do need to be, I think, in a pretty specific place in your writing career to take advantage of what it is that they offer, but they are probably the best marketers that I know of. So support group, network group, like, these should be free. Like, these should be people that are potentially on the same wavelength as you, trying to do the same kind of thing as you. So a group of lit RPG authors who have maybe been on Royal Road that you might connect with, that, and actually I'll put that on here too. Royal Road is pretty specific to lit RPG, but it's a place where there is community around lit RPG. There are some other science fiction and fantasy writers on there doing similar things as the genre kind of expands, but that's a place where you can find people. And then there's also some community there around as people like comment on the work and give feedback on the work and stuff like that. So, but one of the things with a supporter networking group is, like, they are not going to critique each other's work. Like, writers that are typically moving into a support or networking group are pretty confident in what kind of work they're doing, how it sells, what kind of audience they're trying to reach. They are probably already working with editors or a publisher, but it's a place where you can share updated information. There's a lot of trust involved. Like, these are groups where the screenshotting should not be taking place. One of the things about Facebook groups or Discord groups is always be mindful of the fact that while it might be a private group, I can't see the quotes there. Something can always be screenshotted. You still want to be professional and be part of that community, but just be mindful that, it's still a semi-public space. Anything online is going to be like that, right? So these are, more of the online groups that could be helpful. And then there's the critique group. So like I said, you take part in maybe a class, you go to a conference, you learn about a critique group. If you were to Google Eugene, Oregon, you're going to find wordos.com, which is our group. And these are groups that are typically reading each other's work to some extent, giving feedback on it. And then the writers take that feedback and, make changes or do whatever. I think it's really important that the critique group be focused on similar goals. If I can type. If you join a group that really is just there as support in the sense of we're reading each other's work and we're telling you how we feel about it, and, we're just here to help each other produce more work, that's fine. But if you're looking for publication, then you want a group that's really focused on that. If you're, like I mentioned earlier, if you're a romance author and goes to a science fiction group and you want to publish romance, and even a very specific kind of romance, because romance gets very, very granular on what is successful, then maybe that science fiction group is not for you. Maybe you just want to go because your town doesn't have many groups and you would just like to be part of a group. And I'm going to write a science fiction story, once every 90 days, just so I can take part in the group. That's fine. That's perfectly fine too. You just have to accept that that group is not necessarily going to help you reach the goal of publishing, your Academy romance novel. That's not where you'll find good feedback on that. But by being focused on publication, what I mean there, like with the Wordos, is we study the current market, share market information. We critique from the lens of what markets are looking for. What kind of stories are winning awards right now? What kind of stories are getting nominated for awards? What are different markets looking for? How does that change? We study markets. And so that's a different kind of critique group than what might just be a support group. So a thing to keep in mind there. Now, sometimes you get into a group, and I think one of the things you could also look at is what kind of method do they use? So the Wordos, we use what is called the Clarion method. or sometimes I think it's the Milgram Authors Conference. I don't know. We're really fortunate that Eugene, Oregon has kind of a history of, Kate Wilhelm lived here, as well as, why am I blanking on his name? Which is right. I can't remember. I'm gonna have to Google this real quick because it's bothering me. I need to be able to say this. I have these things off the top of my head. Oh, what's funny is that like Clarion brings up all kinds of extra stuff that is no longer the writers' conference. Damon Knight. That's the one I was trying to think of. Okay. That should have come off the top of my head. Damon Knight has also written a very good book on introduction to short stories that you should check out. But anyway, so Kate and Damon, mostly Kate, I think, really pioneered this sort of method of how to approach a short story in a way that is being professional about the story, but not just beating up on the writer. And so when you critique the story, you approach the story as it is. You're not taking it in the like spectrum of other things the author has written. You refer to the text. You don't say you, like talking directly to the writer about a thing was done. Like you only know what was in the story, right? It's like the way you might pick it up in a magazine or an anthology. Like you don't have the writer sitting there to try and make excuses about what's in the text. So that's how those critiques happen. They tend to be, you'll be able to read the work beforehand, but then you have maybe 2 to 3 minutes as folks go around and talk about it. Sometimes like groups will get together and they read the stories right there. A lot of that I think has changed now that everything's pretty much digital or online in some way. Like people can read the stuff beforehand. But I think the thing when hopefully the group has a method of you get to attend a couple meetings before you really take part in critique, and you can get an idea of how they, like, just what the vibe is, right? Like, are they positive? Are they still encouraging, the writers? I've received critiques and I've watched critiques where people will say things like, I don't know why this story exists, or I wish this author would stop doing this, or this is a complete mess of adverbs. It's just like not being positive about the critique. And that I think is not at all the vibe that you want. Like you want to come away from a critique group feeling inspired about things that were good about the story and ways that it could be made better. And sometimes a story is just, it's got to be, torn down and rebuilt. But I still would never want somebody to come away from one of our critiques and feel like it's time to just stop writing altogether, right? That is absolutely not what you want. And I've been doing this long enough that I've watched kind of groups potentially change based on the sort of, vibes of the authors. Some authors really start to sell while others don't. The way people treat authors, that, if they happen to sell something, like people will critique them differently. Uh, and so that's one thing to always keep in mind too, is that while the critique group can give their opinions, they are not editors and they are not readers. And if I've learned anything in this business, it's like, even now that we have, Amazon exists and the internet has existed for, 25 plus years, like what a reader likes and the way a reader enjoys a story is not the way an editor even does it, or another writer who is in your group looking for things to say about a story, right? They are not reading it in the mindset of just chilling out and reading for enjoyment. That's different. So always keep that in mind, because sometimes, the feedback that's being given is just not super helpful. And that's where something like Royal Road, if that's the sort of work you're doing, or those magazine groups or places where readers are going to give better feedback necessarily than places where writers are. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind and to balance that. But if you get into a group where like the vibe is not good, I would say, like, don't be afraid to bounce. Don't be afraid, like, hey, this is not working for me. I need to go do something else for a while. Put up that boundary. if something happens, that hopefully the group is professional enough that if there is a, like our group has a co-chair, has chairs, I'm a chair with a co-chair, that we really try to keep that information, that like feedback flow open. If somebody has feedback about the way a meeting was run or the way some feedback was given, like I really want to hear that so I can, touch base with a writer who maybe needs to rethink how they're giving their feedback so that it's a positive place to be. Like, we're all volunteers. We're all trying to encourage people to do a thing that none of us are really getting rich off of. Um, so few people in this industry are getting any money at all, that we got to be here because we enjoy it and we don't want to push people away. Right. So I would say, what method do they use? And you can ask them about that. Like, how do they do critique? If they can't really tell you, then, that is an indicator, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't attend. It's just a thing to think about. And then, don't be afraid to put up boundaries if it's not working. The more you do this, the more you're going to get a sense of what feedback really helps you. What encourages you and gives you energy. You don't want the group to sap your energy. Because we've all got so little of it, right? So it's hard enough to make the thing and to bring your baby into the world and put ideas on a screen or on paper and have them exist. And now you go to a group of people that are hopefully supposed to help you. And if they don't, get out, then I would start looking at some other places. And one of the things, if you're going to those online spaces, don't be afraid to ask if people have writers groups. One I forgot to mention was Reddit. Reddit does have a couple different short story critique groups, but it just can be hard to find. That's why I sort of like doing it in person, because some of these online systems, like you have to critique a number of stories, and then you may not get the feedback, the same level of feedback that you were hoping on. It's really hard to do that just in general. So don't be afraid to look at different places to find some place that works for you. But the last thing I want to say, like I just already mentioned, is always keep your audience in mind. Don't let the group steer you away from your audience. And I had a conversation, I've had a few conversations now with new writers at conferences. And one of the things that comes up as well is like pace of writing. And just remember too, that the way one person does it is not the way everybody needs to do it or has to do it or should. But there are certain things that will help you sell more than others. So the faster you can get a series out, the easier it is to sell to a publisher these days. Like my publisher Aethon wants at least 2 books before they even talk about publishing a trilogy. They really want to see all those books. If your pen name, like for me, is James S. Aaron, that is a pen name aimed at a certain type of novel. So when the reader goes to that pen name, they know what to expect. It can be confusing or difficult to market an author who is just doing a lot of different things. And we can't all be Stephen King, at least not to start out with, right? Like initially Stephen King was known as the horror writer. And then eventually Stephen King was able to do other things that were more fantasy or more, literary fiction and things like that. Like that's a place you can get to, but it takes work, right? So yeah, if there are other places that you have found writers groups, I would love to hear about it. I just keep it positive. I think time is so short that if you find yourself in a group that is not serving you, like don't be afraid to go, because there are other places to find people that are on your same wavelength, that are trying to accomplish what you're accomplishing. And the other thing I'll mention is that this is not a zero-sum game. A lot of people may think that, and like, yes, there's only so much money and there's only so much that can be published, but the readers that read, like while people might say, less than 1% of people read right now, Those people that do read a lot. And if they like, you cannot write fast enough to make them happy. That's kind of how it is these days. Like they'll go to other places, but you, I don't know, just don't let anything slow you down. If you're in a place in your life where you can write quickly, you have ideas, you can get those things out, like do that while you can do it, and don't let anybody slow you down with that. Okay? Um, so I would, yeah, hopefully this is helpful. If there are things that I missed that I'm not aware of, I would love to hear about it, because I'm always interested in hearing new things about how the market is working and where people can find community, because I do think it's very important to find that community. I've just coming out of a period in my life where medical issues, family issues, job changes, all that stuff is going to happen in your life, and having friends on your side who can maybe just tell you, like, yes, you are still a writer. Maybe you're not writing, maybe you're not publishing, you haven't published in a while, maybe you haven't been writing every day, but you're still a writer. So think about yourself that way. You are still a creative, you are still a person who creates things, and don't get down on yourself if now is not the season where you're doing those things as often as you would like, right? And that's where groups can just be so valuable. And I've made some great friends in groups. And the thing that I think is funny, and we all sort of like laugh at this, it's like we all have the same curse, right? And other people, they don't understand the curse. But when you are in touch with people that have the same feelings, it can just be really valuable. So, so yeah, this helps me frame some of my thoughts about resilience. I haven't gotten into budgeting and structuring your life around how to create things in this crazy world that we live in, but I'll get into that maybe with some other videos. So thank you for hanging out with me. I appreciate you listening. And if you've got any ideas you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it. I'll put links to the things I talked about as much as I can in the show notes. So thanks very much. I'll talk to you later.